Gute Woche. This afternoon, the Rebbe's Gesundheit began to Farbrengen with the expression Maisei Ovois Simin Labonim. Whatever has happened to the Ovis is a simin, is a sign, is an indicator for the children as well. And this expression of Chazal is applied to the Ovis, and this is the inyanim which are discussed in these sedras. We are talking about the Ovis. And as it's explained in Chassidus, Maisei Ovis Simin Labonim means that being that it's the Maisei Ovis, this is a source of strength for the Banim to be able to follow in the same footsteps which were already prepared by the Ovis. Rebbe today in the Farbrengen explained the meaning of a siman. Normally, we refer to the concept of a siman as a means of identification. Let us go back to the Gemara Bava Metzia. When somebody loses something and somebody else finds it, how is it given back to its original owner? When the original owner claims it with a siman. In other words, he has a sign, some sort of a way of identifying it, that the object that he lost has these and these simanim, and that is when he gets it back. So the way we are understanding a siman, obviously a siman is an outside thing in the object. However, there is a siman, the way a siman is much deeper than an outside, just an external way of identifying it. There are times when the siman creates the concept, just like Chazal tell us regarding Yidden. So the Gemara uses the expression that there is a siman to identify Yidden with the three midos that Yidden are to possess: Rachmanim, Baishonim, and Goim Lechasodim. So here the meaning of a siman is a much deeper one. Here a siman is not just a means of identification. The siman, this is what makes a yid. A yid is made, when is he living up to a standard as a yid? When he has these three midas of Rachmanis, Baishonis, and Gemilas Chasodim. So here a siman is much stronger. Or the way we find the siman regarding what is a kosher behemoth, what we are allowed to eat and what we are not allowed to eat. So again, we have simon. So there's a simple way to learn that really there are the behemoths that are kosher and there are the behemoths that are not kosher. The only thing is, in order for us to be able to identify which is kosher and which is not kosher, so that is why the Torah has given us simon. However, there is a deeper way of learning. It is these simonim that make the behemoth kosher or non-kosher, especially the way it's explained in Ruchnius. What is the inyan of the simonim of a malas geiro and a mafresas parsa? What's the inyan of a malas geiro? So Rabbi is explaining the inyan in Ruchnius of a malas geiro is to chew over and over. In other words, to really make sure that the birurim, the inyonim and the gashmis, the kinyonim, which we get into and which we get involved with, are really birurim that have a shaykhs to us, and that we are supposed to be involved in uplifting these sparks of kedusha. In other words, Ba'ayidin is nishto stam azoy gekait, as the Rebbe used the expression, stam eating without any justification for it. He has to really think twice into the berurim which relate to him. Does this Indian have a shaykhs to him or doesn't it? The same when we're talking about the other siman which identifies a behemoth Torah and a non-Torah, and that is mafresas parsa. What is the taich mafresas parsa? That a yid sees that there's a split, there's a right side and there's a left side, and a yid has to know what to choose and where there is to be the sur meira, what he has to stay away from, and what he has to get close to where it is required, devar sei toiv. So Memela, when we're talking about Maisei Ovis similar banim, so it's the deeper meaning. Not only is it a way of identification, but this makes it for the banim that the banim should do the same minyan. And now when we're talking in this week's Sedra, when we're talking about Yaakov, Yaakov we know is the Prir Sheba Ovis, the most chosen of all the Ovis. Regarding Avram, we find that Avram Yotza Mimenu Yishmael. Avram has a shaykhis, his main son, as we can use the expression, was Yitzchak. However, Yishmael is Yotza Mimenu. Came out of him, but it's not the Iker Inyan of Avraham is not Yishmael. Though Yishmael prayed, was mispal to the Eibishter, Lu Yishmael Yichye Lefanecha. But later when the Eibishter made it clear for him that his Kibi Yitzchak Yikor Chazarah, that his main nachas he will derive from Yitzchak, then Yishmael became in a way of Yotza Mimenu. The same when we're talking about Yitzchak. Yitzchak had two children, Yaakov and Esav. Even though Yitzchak felt that he should give the brachas to Esav, because he wanted to uplift Esav. And as explained the Chassidus on the entire concept of Kitzayid Bepiv, on the whole Indian of the Avodah of Esav. But nonetheless, once it was proven to Yitzchak, the Rebbe brought out to Yitzchak that his main nachas will be Yaakov, then it's Esav is Yotza Mimenu. Esav parted from him, was a child of his, but this is not the main continuity of Yitzchak is not through Esav. The main continuity of Yitzchak is through Yaakov. However, by Yaakov we find Mitosei Shleima. All the children of Yaakov were perfect. And as Chazal tell us regarding Ruvain, anybody that would say that Reuven sinned is only making an error. So what does this emphasize? That all the children of Yaakov were all in perfect shape. So Mamela we can understand on the Madrega of Yaakov. If Yaakov himself was at such a level that Mitosei Shleima, so we can understand what was if Yaakov's children were all perfect, Yaakov himself was the Prir Sheba Ovis, the most chosen of all the Ovis. So regarding Avram, we find the Pasuk tells us, Avram Zokim Bo Bayomim. So Chassidus teaches, what's the pshat? Avram got old. Bo Bayomim he came with his days. So Chassidus explains that Avram accounted for all his days. All his days were utilized properly. The same when we're talking about Yitzchak. Yitzchak we know was an oilot mima to such an extent that it was forbidden for him to leave Eretz Yisrael. Yitzchak constantly had to be in Eretz Yisrael. So when we're talking about Yaakov, what do we find in Yaakov's life? Here we have a whole Chazarah that tells us Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, that Yaakov left Beersheva, and where did he go to? He went to Haran. And the whole Chazarah tells us how Yaakov spent his life. Quite a portion of his life was spent in Haran. In other words, Yaakov left Eretz Yisrael. Where did he go? To Haran. And even when Yaakov came back to Eretz Yisrael, what happened later in the later years of his life? Yaakov went to Mitzrayim. And how long did Yaakov live in Mitzrayim? He was there for 17 full years. And as we know, 17 is Begematri, is the equivalent of Toiv. And that is why Meforshim tell us that Yaakov's best years were in Mitzrayim. So the question arises, we're talking about a person who's Prir Sheba Avos, the most chosen of all of the Avos, and here we say he spent so much time in Haran, spent so much time in Chutz La'aretz, and to such an extent that in the last years, the last and best years of his life were in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim we know is that time the civilization of Mitzrayim was the lowest of all the Umas. So, how does it coincide for Yaakov to say that the best years of his life were spent in Mitzrayim? So the Rebbe brings out, what is the inyan of Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz? When we're talking Eretz Yisrael means Eretz relates to the word rotzain, desire. Eretz Yisrael emphasizes where the land is in the position that it wishes to do the desire of its master. And it's felt and obvious in Eretz Yisrael. What is it in Chutz La'aretz? In Chutz La'aretz we say, there it is not felt. This revelation of Getlichkeit as it is felt in Eretz Yisrael. And we know we have Eretz Yisrael in the simple sense. Then we know we have the famous expression from the Tzemach Tzedek when a Chassid once came to him and he told him that he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Tzemach Tzedek told him, Mach da Eretz Yisrael. Was meint us? That it means that even here in Chutz La'aretz a person has an opportunity that he can elevate Chutz La'aretz to an extent from Machen da Eretz Yisrael. What happened by Yaakov? Yaakov went to Choron. Was the time Yaakov went to Choron? Yaakov reached out to Choron. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, vayelech Choron. As Bechlal Chassidus teaches that Yaakov this relates to each and every Yid. Every Yid comes down, Melmaila. And Be'er this relates to the 7 middas which every Yid has. And the Yid gets involved in the Avodah of Choron. This is the emphasis of the Avodah of Baal Tshuva. There's the Avodah of Tzadikim, and then we know there's the Avodah of Baal Tshuva. What did Yaakov reach out to? Yaakov wanted to accomplish the Avodah of Baal Tshuva, which this is the Avodah of B'mokim she Baal Tshuva imdim afilu tzadikim gemura meinim yichaylam lamed sham. And this is the level that Yaakov wanted to reach. We know there's an Inyan of Avodas HaBeinani, which the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya about, that HaBeinani, his dibur is perfect, his mindset is perfect, and as far as his machshava, even if he has a thought to do anything wrong, he immediately pushes it away. However, what's the Avodah of a Baal Tshuva? Avodah of a Baal Tshuva is that there shouldn't be even no thought to do an Aveira. A Baal Tshuva reaches to such high level, and this is what Yaakov was aiming to reach to by his Avodah, say by the Avodah in Choron, as well as by the Avodah in Mitzrayim. And this is what Yaakov reached to. As the Rebbe expressed himself, a Baal Tshuva Taka doesn't immediately become from the level that prior to becoming a Baal Tshuva, he was a Rasha. So we say that immediately he jumps and reaches to the level of a Tzaddik Gamor. It doesn't go that way. But ultimately it goes step by step, that he reaches to a level of B'makim Shebal Tshuva, Imdim Tzaddikim Uram and Michaylam Lamich. And here the Rebbe brought out an Avodah that a Yid has to know, just like we find by the Ovis. We find by Avraham and we find by Yitzchak that just like by them we find Yishmael was Yotza Mimenu, Yitzchak was Yotza Mimenu. What does this mean? There are certain inyanim that have no shaykhs to. He has to know that this has no shaykhs to him. On the other hand, the Yid has to know what is his avodah and where he has to reach out to, and he has to reach out into Choron, into an area which is considered Choron. Why? Because it causes anger to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. Choron Meloshen Charoin Af Shaloilam, causing anger to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And from Choron he has to make Vayelech Charono. Choron should start moving. Choron should start walking. Choron should become a Mahalech. In other words, it should no longer be in a level of Choron. Choron should be uplifted. This he has to know is his Avodah. Sai Benegir to Yidden, and even Benegir Goyim as well also. It is our responsibility to see to it that a Goyim become familiar with the Zayim Mitzvahs B'nai Noach and live up to the Zayim Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And as well as when we come into contact with a Goy, whether we come into contact with him through business or through other ways of contact. And this is the most ideal Goy, is the Goy who's considered a Ger Toishav. What's the Taich Ger Toishav? A Ger Toishav is such a Goy that has accepted upon himself not to worship Ta'aved Zarah. Which this is one of the mitzvahs of the 7 mitzvahs of the Noachide mitzvahs. In other words, our obligation and responsibility is to reach out to Yidden to see to it that Yidden are proper, as well as not only Yidden, but to Goyim as well, that the Goyim should adhere to all the 7 Noachide mitzvahs. Here the Rebbe brings a Rambam into the Shir Rambam. Today, Shabbos, we began the halachas of tshuva. In the halachas of tshuva, the Rambam talks that when a person does tshuva, his tshuva becomes accepted to the extent that yoid olav yedei ta'alumais shelo yoshuv lekisla oid, that the Rebishter, who's called Yedei ta'alumais, the one who knows everything that's concealed, says witness on him that he will no longer, that he will never again come back lekisla. Kisla means to his shtus, to again doing an aveir. So the Rebbe is asking, obviously, isn't this a contradiction to the entire concept of bchira? We know that a person has a bchira, a choice, can choose the right way and can choose chas v'shalom the wrong way. And here we say that once a person does proper tshuva, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is witnessing on him, Yedei ta'alumais, Yoidol of Yedei ta'alumais, that he will no longer, never again return back lekisla. Truth is further in the Rambam. The Rambam raises bichlal this whole question of Yediyah of bchira. How is it that how can we say that a person has a choice to do whatever he wants at the time the Rebishter knows everything in advance? And the Rambam brings out, that's in the further Prolkim, not in today's shin, further shiurim. There the Rambam brings out that the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not affect our ma'isa, our act, our deed. But regarding the person who's doing the tshuva, the Rebbe is bringing out today in the Farbrengen, just like there is somebody, person knows what happened in the past, and there are those people that can say Yidei Asidos, they can say prophecy, what will happen in the future. Could be a Yid, could be a non-Jew, and they will say what is going to happen. So by them saying what's going to happen, by them seeing the future, what's going to happen, this does not take away in any way the bchira of the person. The person still remains with his choice. We cannot say that just because somebody is predicting, who knows what's going to happen, this will have an effect on the person's choice. The person remains with his choice. It's the most ridiculous thing to say, says the Rebbe, that just because there is somebody who's a Yidei Asidos and saying what's going to be in the future, and he's saying what's going to take place, this in no way has any impact on what a person is going to choose. It's up to the person to choose the right thing and to choose the proper thing. This relates to everybody, to men, to women, to children. Especially by children, says the Rebbe, we see in nature that a child sometimes may want something, and may have a very strong desire to the thing, and this may be the wrong thing for the child. So it's the obligation of parents to bring it to the child's attention that what his desire is and what he has such a strong temptation to is the wrong thing. And maybe the same thing when we're talking about Yidden Bechlal, it doesn't mean necessarily a child, the age of a child. Times we have the desires to wrong things, we may want the wrong things. So here we are told to make sure that we go on the proper path and we see to it, utilize our influence on other Yidden, that they too go on the proper path, as well as utilize our influence on non-Jews, that they follow in this Sheva Mitzvahs, B'nai Noach, which every guy is commanded to do so. The Rebbe continued, Chazal tell us, Misha Torach be'erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos. The one who has prepared on erev Shabbos, he has what to eat on Shabbos. Mela, what was this erev Shabbos? Yesterday, 10 days in the month of Kislev, is the Chag HaGeula of the Mittel Rebbe. That is the day when the Mittel Rebbe was released from prison. And Mela, that is a Geula not only for the Mittel Rebbe, but that is a Geula for Chassidus in general. And today, this Shabbos, which comes right after this Chag HaGeula, this Shabbos has a Shaychus to Geula. Especially that from this Shabbos, we will be having this week 15 days in the month. 15 days in the month, that's the day of Kaimes Sihara Bashlemusa. That's when the moon is at its completeness of this month, of the month of Kislev. And in the month of Kislev we have such special days that relate to Geula. The day of Yutes Kislev, which will be forthcoming, as well as also Chanukah, which we will be celebrating. Rabbi says, definitely Yud Kislev was utilized properly with Chassidische Farbrengens and proper decisions accepted at the Chassidische Farbrengen, Sai Thursday night as well as Friday. But nonetheless, we still have an opportunity to make up for whatever we missed out on Yud Kislev, and that is during this entire week, during the days which today is the day of Yud Aleph Kislev and the forthcoming days as well. These are all days that we can utilize and chaparain whatever we have missed out as far as properly celebrating Yud Kislev. Talking about the arrest of the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe also referred to the arrest of the Tzemach Tzedek. Regarding the Tzemach Tzedek, it is told in the Sichas of the previous Rebbe that the Tzemach Tzedek once came to a very long conference which was regarding Jewish education, Yiddish Chinuch, and at that conference Tzemach Tzedek was arrested several times. He was arrested and he was released. In the Sichas it seems it was a kind of a house arrest. Tzemach Tzedek was in Petersburg and Leningrad, which was then the capital, and he came to participate in asifas and meetings which were called Jewish leadership at that time. And being that Tzemach Tzedek came out with a very strong opinion against the government at that time, so that Tzemach Tzedek was put into house arrest several times during the series of the meetings which were going on there. But finally, ultimately, what happened was that the Tzemach Tzedek was released to such an extent, the Rebbe mentioned today, that the Tzemach Tzedek was given a certificate of being an honorary citizen. An honorary citizen not only for himself, but something which should go over to generations to come as well, that his entire family, from there and after, are all honorary citizens in the government. And all of these inyanim should lead to the ultimate inyan of Geula. When will we have the ultimate inyan of Geula? So the Rebbe always mentions, what is the inyan of Golus? The difference between Golus and Geula is, Geula has a letter Aleph, and Golus does not have the letter Aleph. Aleph standing for the Alufei Shaloylam, for the Rabbeinu Shaloylam. Notice also that Geula, in numeric value of Geula is equivalent to 45. 45 is Ma. What is Ma? Explain the Svarim. Ma means the concept of bittul. Va'anachnu Ma. What are we? We are nothing. In other words, when we have the Gilui of Geula, then we have to be at a level of Ma. In other words, total bittul, not to feel our yeshes, not to feel our metzias. And at the same time, what will lead to Geula? Also, the gematria of Geula, it is through Ma, through being at a level of Anachnu Ma, through being at a level of bittul. This is what will lead to Geula. Once Geula happens, once Mashiach comes, then this concept of Ma, of bittul, will be totally felt. Why? Because the Rambam describes at length what will be when Mashiach will come. Then we'll all be in a position, what will be felt in the world? What will we be feeling? We'll be feeling total godliness all over. The world will be inspired and permeated totally with feeling of Gettelkeit. So what does that mean? Then there will be a total bittul in the world. Ma begematri Geula. Ma bittul. And that will be the attitude that will be prevailing in the world when Mashiach will come.